Welcome to the Transforming Trauma podcast. Transforming Trauma is presented by the NARM Training Institute. I'm your host, Sarah Bueno, and I'm delighted to have you join us today. Hi, Transforming Trauma listeners. Do you want to join the international NARM community in support of trauma-informed care? If so, please consider joining us for the NARM Online Basics Training to become a NARM-informed professional. In this online training, participants will learn more about the changing field of trauma, a deeper understanding of the impacts of ACEs and complex trauma, and how NARM, one of the first models specifically designed to address CPTSD, can support professionals in the growing trauma-informed field. If you are looking for more advanced training in understanding the impacts of attachment, relational, developmental, and intergenerational trauma, and you're working in healthcare, education, substance abuse recovery, or allied fields, please join us for this Level 1 NARM training to become a NARM-informed professional. The next NARM Online Basics training is starting in September 2021 and will run one weekend a month through December 2021. Register now to reserve your spot. Please visit www.narmtraining.com/onlinebasics. We hope you'll join us in learning how to transform trauma. Today's guest is Bonnie Badenoch. Bonnie is a therapist, mentor, teacher, and author, and has spent the last 15 years integrating the discoveries of relational neuroscience into the art of therapy. She's the co-founder of the nonprofit agency Nurturing the Heart with the Brain in Mind. For 25 years, she has supported trauma survivors and those with significant attachment wounds to reshape their neural landscape for a life of meaning, resilience, and warm relationships. These days, Bonnie takes joy in offering immersion trainings for therapists and others through the development of deep listening and the embodiment of the principles of interpersonal neurobiology. So please enjoy my conversation with Bonnie Badenoch. Hello, Bonnie. Welcome to Transforming Trauma.
Well, it's wonderful to be here. I'm so glad to be here, Sarah.
Thank you so much. Well, I'm really excited to hear more details about your work. But before we dig into that, the way we begin all these interviews on Transforming Trauma is we begin a NARM session with a client and ask, what is it that you want listeners to get out of this episode today?
Oh, it's a really good question. I think what's most important to me is that we begin to get a sense at the foundation of healing trauma, or really of just being a therapeutic presence in the world, is to build this capacity to listen without judgments and with a really open heart so that people feel safe enough to become vulnerable so that healing can happen or that deep conversations can unfold. And in this culture, that is not something we nurture very much. So that to me is like the heart of the work we do.
Oh, that's beautiful. And I can see exactly why Brad wanted you to be on the podcast, because that's a lot of what we want as a NARM therapist, is to be able to be that unconditional positive regard. Well, tell us a little bit more about your history and how you got into working with trauma.
Well, I got into it the way so many of us do, in that I had a really traumatic childhood and I had not had any help with it. I had breakdowns periodically and, just a tragic family history of parents who were so wounded. And so in my 40s, I finally got therapy with somebody who could actually help me. I had been teaching college prior to that, and I realized that what I needed to do and wanted to do and yearned to do was give others what I was being given. So I went back to school once again and became a marriage and family therapist. And then right after grad school, we started Center for Hope and Healing in Southern California, two of us. And it was dedicated entirely to dealing with severe trauma. And then that developed into also bringing in interns, which after getting licensed and all of those things and enough practice, we brought in interns who were particularly interested in working with very severe attachment loss and all kinds of trauma, what we now call DID and what we call borderline personality, if we want to be really disrespectful and, those kinds of things. And we said we had a sign over our door that said, if there's someone you don't feel you can see, please send them to us. So
wow.
We were there, and I was there for 17 years and then moved up to the Pacific Northwest, which I'm loving, about 12 years ago. And then up here, we now do immersion programs for therapists to help them develop this capacity, because we can say we're present, but most of us don't even really know what that means, in terms of neurobiology, don't know what it is to be safe enough for people to feel like they are held so securely that they can afford to move into these really difficult waters.
Well, I'm sure it's more complex than you can say in a soundbite, but could you unpack that for us? Like, what is presence?
Yeah, I think that the two people that have influenced me, I mean, I feel like I really stand on the foundation of Dan Siegel's interpersonal neurobiology work. And so I may not mention him a lot today, but he's the person who I was in his study group for 5 years, and he really put this work underneath my feet. But the two people that I'm going to probably mention the most are Iain McGilchrist and Stephen Porges. Many people are familiar with Porges and polyvagal theory, and he really helps us to understand what true presence and true safety are and how dependent they are on being non-judgmentally, without agenda, open to whatever is happening in this moment. And that's where Iain McGilchrist comes in. He wrote a book called The Master and His Emissary, which is about the two hemispheres of the brain. He talks about how in the right hemisphere, we are in a relational state if we are healthy enough inside, where we can open to what's actually emerging in this moment. So the cool thing is, clear back in 1994, Steve Porges recognized that this social engagement system, what we call the ventral system, actually lateralizes to the right hemisphere. Clear back in 1994, long before Iain wrote his book, which was like 2009. So all of a sudden, these two really began to hold this work for us as we could understand more deeply how do we cultivate a connection with the right hemisphere of the brain and have support of the left's wisdom about how these processes work, that we can afford to be open enough to enter into that state that Steve Porges is talking about in this ventral connection. So that's a lot of words, but basically what it means is that we need to do our own work so that we're healthy enough inside that we can afford to actually be in this right hemisphere, emerging in the moment state, because it's also filled with tentativeness and anxiety because we don't know what's going to happen next. So we have to have our own inner world being constantly supported. And it's so important for each of us doing this work to have 1, 2, 3 people with whom we know who will always hold us, who we can go to and say, I had this terribly difficult time with this particular person today, and they just listen and give to me what I was giving to this person, this unconditional positive regard, as you say. But now that we understand the neurobiology, it's really coming from a place of security inside of our own self, that we can afford to have that openness and afford to really hold and hear difficult things that are filled with intense energies, that we can be open to that we don't have to shut it off. And the whole culture is against it. It's not how our culture operates. It's not how our training operates. It's not how most of the trainings operate that we attend. It's much more hemisphere kind of learn these protocols and do these things to people, for people, and all of that, rather than being open to the wisdom that's in the bodies of each of us about what's needed next, if only we have a safe enough place.
You are speaking my language. Yeah, this is really my jam, really encouraging therapists to do their work. And I guess I'm curious, what do you see or what have you seen over your years of working with therapists of what gets in the way of people really bravely kind of leaping into the healing?
Well, I don't know that there's real encouragement. In most therapy training programs, we have to go to therapy for X number of sessions, whatever that is in the particular program. But there isn't in the main body of the teaching any sense that the biggest part of our training ought to be being helped to get into contact with these tender places inside of us so that we can have them be held and have the experience of being cared for in the way that we want to care for others, because really we need to internalize that. Instead, we go into school and we learn a lot of theory. And I'm not to say that some of that isn't important, but if it isn't coupled with this other kind of being held and all of that and the safety of that and the vulnerability of that, the training's really incomplete. And it also forces people to be into the left hemisphere. For most people, taking the licensing exam is the most frustrating experience because you're not doing anything that has anything to do with the actual process of therapy. So I think we need to start at the roots there, but then we need to look at the deeper roots that our culture doesn't encourage this. There's research that would suggest that about 75% of us are really locked in that left hemisphere, which is goals and behaviors and tasks and protocols and algorithms and evidence-based practice and all of those things. And when we focus on that, we're completely pulled away from attending to our own right hemisphere, much less anybody else's. So we need a paradigm shift as far as understanding what it is that promotes healing and this foundation of being able to be there, and that it begins with us. And Occasionally you'll have a professor in school that really knows this and can bring that, but it's not present in any programs that I know as part of the baseline of what training is about.
I've heard that there's one school, and I'm saying this knowing that I have no names to back it up, but I did hear a podcast where they were talking about a school that really does focus on that inside out training. And I thought, yes, why aren't all schools this way?
Yes. Well, the culture doesn't, again, support it. Our whole culture is not built that way. And so it's really difficult to buck the trend, to buck the dominant way of doing things, partly because we're attaching people and we want to belong to the group. And so if we move away from this, I hear so many people say, I'm really practicing this and I'm having trouble finding people to relate to for consultation, for peer support or anything else, because everybody's telling me I'm doing it wrong and that I'm not focused enough on protocols and I'm not focused enough on assessment and I'm not this and this. I mean, protocols are fine as long as they're held loosely and they're allowed to develop in the light of what the person is bringing, the individual is bringing. And it's hard to do that unless we feel really comfortable and settled in our own healing, right hemisphere trauma stuff ourselves.
Do you feel like there is a paradigm shift happening right now? Because I don't know if it's just the algorithms showing me the stuff on social media that I want to see, but I sense, and with the people around me and with clients who are coming to me in a different way, not so symptom focused, I'm curious if there is something shifting right now.
Well, I hope so. And unlike you, I'm in a self-selected circle, though, too, where the people that come to do training with us are looking for precisely support to do this at this point. Yeah. So I don't know. And also over the years, gradually, I think we get known as a certain kind of therapist, and then friends tell, and then we get, others coming in. So I don't know either. I mean, it's possible. I think as Porges's work gets more known, not primarily as a set of tools to work with the nervous system, but the deep underlying messages like connection's a biological imperative, safety is the treatment. I mean, those are two things that Steve says that are, to me, just like electric and so important to really get that safety is the treatment and then be curious about what makes people safe. And the beauty is we all know what makes us feel safe. When we are feeling terrible and we go to somebody, do we want them to fix us? No, we don't.
No.
I mean, I unless we're actually saying, could you give me some practical advice about this? What we really want is to be heard and held and allowed to be accompanied as we move into these feeling states. And because we all know that at some level, it is kind of a mystery to me why there isn't a natural tendency to move in that direction. But when all the other pressures come, it's really hard to do that. Even just filing insurance claims makes us go into the left hemisphere and do all this stuff that probably isn't why any of us got into this work.
Right. Well, and I wonder because I think that we are all seeking safety on some level. And I think that there's a false safety or an illusion of safety in left hemisphere type engagement, right? So if I know what to do, I mean, I remember when I graduated from my master's program, all of a sudden I was like, oh my, I don't even know what I'm doing in here because I didn't have a checklist. I didn't have, a list of things to do. And I think we know, those of us who've really deepened into our own work, that that's actually not where safety is. It's an illusion.
Right. But you're right. When we are scared, we move into the left hemisphere and look for some way to exert control. So yes, because we get sympathetically aroused. And there are probably no new therapists that aren't somewhat sympathetically aroused. Right. I remember feeling like I got to school just great, which, that I can do. Am I going to be able to sit with somebody? I mean, I really remember that feeling from my first client, like, can I do this? And I was so fortunate because I had the support of the most wonderful supervisor in my first year of practice. That really set the foundation for me because he did hold me and listen to me and was not critical of me and kept telling me, you're just a baby therapist. You're not supposed to know all this.
Yes. Oh, I love that's what my husband became a social worker, and that's what I tell him too. You're just a baby. It's okay.
Right. And there isn't any reason why you should know all of this. And it would be weird if you did. And I had the good fortune of having those years of my own therapy under my belt. And that gave me a little bit of security because I had really internalized how my therapist had been with me. And that had been such a life-changing experience for me that I feel like I had some feet on the ground, but I still didn't have a sense of whether I could actually hour after hour sit with people's pain.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm curious if you want to speak about whether it's your experience of figuring out how you sit with people's pain or how you teach people to sit with people's pain. What did you discover?
Well, I think I think it's all grounded in our own humility as human beings, and to recognize that when we are sitting with people and they are anxious or they're depressed or they start to dissociate or they come in, a little drunk or something like that, that what's being asked of us is to receive them as they are, knowing that they're doing the very best that they can with what they've got. And so it really brings judgments down. And for me, a lot of this is grounded both in my experience of being the client, but part of it is also really grounded in really learning interpersonal neurobiology deeply, like really studying it so that my left hemisphere feels very nourished in understanding that what I just said is actually true, that there is no such thing really as pathology. People are doing the best they can do with what they've got, given how their neurobiology is arranged from their life's experiences and what level of support they have. And if I can welcome people in that spirit, then I can really sit with that. And then also afterwards, notice what's been touched in me. Because there's resonance between us. If someone is anxious, then I'm going to also feel that anxiety in my body to some degree. And sometimes I will get pulled into it. And then we're two anxious people in the room and nobody's safe, but we can repair that. There's a rupture and then there's a repair. So this wonderful man, Ed Tronick, who's done all this research on attachment and all of that, says that we human beings are capable of making the connection with somebody that really feels full about 33% of the time. And all the rest is rupture and repair. And if that doesn't induce humility in us, I don't know what will. So that remembering that this is what the process is like, then I can have the freedom to actually be with my own awakenings inside as they happen, and go to somebody who cares about me deeply and can sit with me while I work with that. So then it's a co-healing kind of thing. What gets awakened in me is an opportunity to heal something. But if what I've learned and all that is I'm supposed to be, this like even keel, perfect presence, I don't have the freedom to even notice what's happening inside me.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, again, the humility of being two human beings sitting in a room together. I have some special things that I bring. I develop therapeutic presence and all of that, but I'm still just a human being with my attachment system and my implicit memories and whatever traumas linger in me, and there's always some in everybody. And I'm going to be in relationship with you and be open to ruptures and repairs often that happen.
And this way of holding the work, how I'm hearing it is it really brings the humanity of the therapist into the room. And that is precisely in grad school what they try to beat out of us.
Yes.
Yeah.
I do. And that's really, really hard, I think. But I feel like, again, with my first therapist, he had his own ways of being in the room and that were sometimes not helpful for me. And I have my ways of being in the room that are not helpful for others. But if we can talk about them, if I can notice that something is off, and if I say something and something is clearly stirred in the other person, I want to ask what just happened and can we talk about it? And let's be with that and be open to saying, I can see how that would have touched something in you, and I'm sorry for how I said that. And I'm so glad you could let me know about it. That kind of interchange. I've had some of my clients say that the most meaningful moments in therapy were when I screwed up,
Yeah.
could own it. And they said, nobody in my family ever did that.
Yes.
And that was an enormously reparative experience, and also helped that person feel like they didn't have to be perfect either, that they could just recognize their humanity and all of that. So it's actually wonderful for everybody involved when these things happen and things break down and then they mend. I mean, it brings hope. It's like things don't have to be spoiled forever or ruined or damaged or whatever, that we come back stronger after a rupture that's followed by a repair.
Right.
And if we don't do that, we're trying to live up to an impossible standard.
Right. In this too, I hear to be able to really truly apologize for a mistake that we've made and own that, it does take a lot of humility, which you've been speaking about. And again, just kind of shifting back to the cultural expectation that we know what we're doing and we have this like strong and penetrable ego. And as a therapist, that's actually dangerous.
Yeah, it really is. The idea that we have the expertise and we know better than the client, to me, feels supremely arrogant. The expert on the client's inner world is that person. And if there's enough safety and enough support in really building all the neurobiology they need to really get in touch inside, they are the guide and we are the one who is supporting them on this journey. In Dan's study group, we were playing around with other words than client and therapist or patient and all of that. And we came up with Sherpas and trekkers.
Oh,
The people who come to us are the trekkers. It's their journey. We have some certain things that we know about the nature of this journey and all of that, but ultimately we're in service to their journey. And I really like that image a lot, that whatever I bring of my own healing predominantly, and also of things I've learned, like my practice is around more experiential things. So we do sand tray, we do non-dominant hand drawing, and then we do this really deeper inner work of being able to go inside and allow whatever wants to emerge, are mainly the things that I do. So even though I've learned some other things, I have found that those are the things that resonate most with me and that help my people get in touch with what's in there. So I have these things to offer, but I always do it tentatively and say, does it feel like you'd like to go toward the sand and the miniatures today? Does that feel? Check inside. And they'll go like, no, that doesn't feel quite right. And it's like, okay, well, just let's sense how we would like to move with this experience that's arriving now, and really trusting in their wisdom. I think it's more important that I trust them and their healing capacity than it is that they trust me. They don't really have any reason to trust me. They have bravely walked into this room to bare their soul in some way, and they don't know me. But I know who they are as a human being, and I can trust that they have what they need to heal. And I've been working with people with the most severe wounds for 30 years. And I do know that we have inside of us what we need to heal, but the environment and the support has to be right to do that.
What you're saying is so beautiful and so resonant with NARM. And I'm always listening with the ear of the listener to ask questions that might be coming up for people. And I want to go back to something you said about there is no pathology. Also that, of course, the client has within them what they need to heal, and we're being guided by the client. And I totally believe that. And yet there's a part of me that's like, there's denial there. There's, there are evil people in the world, right? So I'm really curious with your framework, how do you make sense of the fact that there is bad stuff in the world and that there are people who don't have awareness of what's going on internally?
Well, as we get hurt, one of the things that happens is that we build up protections, and those protections look like all kinds of things. I mean, they can look like my favorite protector is ice cream.
I love it. Okay, I love.
It has led me to have a struggle with weight all my life, but it doesn't going out and hurting other people. Other people build up protections. The only way I can be safe is if I make the first move and make sure everybody around me is controlled. And it isn't a conscious thing. These protections spring up that way. Other people may protect through doing self-harm. Other people may do it through, running 10 miles a day. I mean, there's all kinds of ways that we don't get in contact with the pain inside of us because we don't have the support we need to do that. So people that are doing bad things in the world are doing those bad things because of a well of pain inside of them that they are protecting. Reading Donald, I don't know if it's okay to say this, but reading Donald Trump.
Yes, it is. Go on.
Reading about his childhood gave me some compassion for this man who I don't think ever made it past 2.5, if that. And so we have this man dwelling in this hell inside, and it's all been encouraged in his family to put it onto the outside. And that's what he's doing still. And so there is this way that these pains inside drive the actions that hurt so many people. I've had people come in. There's always this man comes to mind who came in and said, I've shaken my baby and I can hardly live with myself. And I know I'm going to do it again because when that baby cries and there's a certain sound in the cry, I just wanted to stop. And so I just want to shake this baby. And he looked at me like, and now you're going to tell me what a bad person I am. And I said, I know you have no intention of hurting your child. And I know that's not where your heart is. And I know this is coming from a place inside of you where there is your own wound. And we were able to work through all of that and over quite a long time because he had been brutalized as a baby himself.
Yeah.
This was now playing out in this impulse to do this. But the beautiful thing was he went for help, and so many people don't. They're too scared. They don't know how to do it. Their protections are so strong that they're just terrified of giving them up, even though they wouldn't say it that way. But there's, it's like I'd rather drink myself to death than get in touch with what's inside of me, even though, again, they wouldn't use those words. But that's the process that's happening. I would literally rather drink myself to death than touch this pain that lives inside of me. No matter how much I'm hurting others around me or whatever, I can't do it. And without support, they can't. And when we haven't had support as kids, we don't expect we'll ever get it.
Right. And if we had a culture that was actually creating more spaces of support, then people would more readily seek it. Yeah.
That's right. And that it wasn't seen as a sign of weakness,
Right.
but actually a sign of strength to be willing to be with this pain so that it can be held in a way that it's healed, and then everything begins to change. So I don't know if that answered your question, but again, this idea that we have many parts inside of us. We do what's called inner community work, similar to IFS, but significantly different, but internal family systems. But again, part work. And as we do that, the parts that we also encounter are these protectors. Whether it's the part of me that takes me to the freezer, or it's a part of somebody else that buries themselves in a book so that there's no relationship at all, or it's the one who's gone out and done something violent or addictions or whatever. We work with those protectors in a sense of gratitude and that they may have saved this person's life because they kept them from feeling the overwhelming pain that they couldn't have survived until there was enough support. So we don't approach it as bad parts of them that have to be gotten rid of, like when we used to call it resistances and defenses and all that. Instead, we say protection. This has been your protection. And we can be with this protection, and then we can work underneath that. As these protectors feel value, they often will begin to bring up the parts that they've been protecting. So if you see, I'm doing this stuff and it's protecting something else under here, all these parts can work together. I mean, that's like really a brief sense of it. But it is my sense that when people are doing awful things, that they are doing them because they're having to protect something inside of themselves that they can't tolerate. And I know there's a very, very small percentage of people that have brain anomalies that make them violent and all of that. But we're talking about a really, really small percentage of the people that are hurting others aren't doing it for those reasons. Most of them aren't doing it.
And I do just want to qualify for any listeners who may have been the victim of somebody causing harm. We're not saying that it's okay. We're just saying that this is a product of trauma, but that doesn't mean the behavior is okay.
Of course not. No, the behavior is not okay. And it's such a blessing when somebody who is doing those behaviors actually comes for help. I worked with a man who had killed somebody and killed somebody in a rage and had gone to prison, as he should have. And not that prison was helpful. There needed something to happen. What we do now is not helpful, but he had done that and was afraid it could happen again because it had happened so fast that he was really worried about it. So I worked with him, and he came to really, again, sense where this was coming from inside of him, and we were able to comfort that young part. So no, of course, the behaviors are never okay, but we need also to have systems that helps people from this viewpoint so that instead of putting them into systems that are going to hurt them more and make it more likely to do awful things, we need a system that actually recognizes what's going on and can help with appropriately keeping away from being able to hurt others, but to have there be some kind of a healing experience that happens along the way as well, I think. And I'm certainly not going to live to see that happen at my age, but I do sense that there is more going on around the legal community and things like that, where some are really thinking about this now. Like the way we're doing this is really like 100%, 180 degrees out of sync with what needs to happen.
Well, this kind of begs the miracle question. So if you could wave a magic wand and have our systems and our country really be more trauma informed to support healing, what would you want to see change first?
Wow. I don't know that I've thought about first and second, like what order.
Well, we don't have to order them, but
most important. But when we talk about the penal system, I do think of, I believe it was in Missouri, they took the kids that were being brought into juvenile detention and they did something entirely different with them, which is they built them into a community so that these kids were supporting each other, and they had really good therapeutic support that wasn't kind of namby-pamby, get in touch with your feelings kind of thing, but really allowed kids to express and also made them responsible for the health of the community. So there's this great picture in the paper of the bunkhouse in Missouri, and here were a couple of these big old kids that had been in all kinds of difficulty, and there was a teddy bear on every bed. But there
Oh,
was also a communal living situation that was set up so that they could develop their empathy and their morality, which go hand in hand. And they had very little recidivism coming out of that system.
wow.
Now, why it didn't spread wider, I don't know. But there is something about community building around this and having the people that are helping in the therapeutic sense be informed about that this is arising out of pain that makes a safe enough space for people to begin to be a healing community instead of a further violent community. So there have been small examples of that.
I'm going to take a guess as to why that didn't spread. Money. I'm sure it cost more. And so people don't want to pay for that because that's not what our culture supports.
Right. So at this point, if a juvenile system gets into real trouble, like they're going to be shut down because they're doing such awful things to the kids, they will bring this model in. But it's also, again, hard in a left-shifted society to have this be seen as not something that's weak and stupid because these are bad kids because of the judgment. These are bad kids and we have to treat them like they're bad kids, and they're not. They're not.
Right.
So it seems like we would need to go into every system. I think,
Right.
I think all the members of Congress should be gathered together and spend about 6 weeks with Steve Porges
Yeah.
and learn about what safety means and how, as long as you feel unsafe, you can't actually get anything done.
Yes.
Like if people could just hear that, sometimes there are these big ideas that I think if people could experience them in their bodies and feel the relief of it, they might be willing to do what is necessary. But you could just say those words to Congress or any group and it goes right, it goes into the left hemisphere and right out. It doesn't change anything. But with enough exposure and enough real experience of it, then there would be the wish to change it because it feels so much better to be listening to each other.
That I'm just really sitting with the image of what it would be like to infiltrate Congress, hold them hostage because you have to, because they're not going to do it willingly, but have them really listen to this information.
There was a congressman that was really, I can't remember who it was, but was supporting mindfulness not for his colleagues and also in all the systems, whether it was education or whatever the system was, the practice of mindfulness. So that was really nice. But again, bubbled up and went away and nothing happened. And so longstanding systems that are, held in place by fear, basically, are hard to shift. We know so much about education that we don't implement for the same reason, because the teachers, the administrators, everybody's scared and thinks that getting test scores is really the deal. And so even though for 20 years we've known that that's absolutely not the way to educate kids, it's very hard for systems to shift when they're based in fear.
Yes. Yeah.
Fear freezes. We're scared. We kind of freeze in place and don't have the flexibility of movement that we have when we feel safe.
And curiosity is
And
squashed.
curiosity is squashed. Absolutely.
I sort of think of, I don't know if this is true, but the opposite of curiosity is certainty. And again, that's right, driven by the left hemisphere.
Right, exactly. And then we think of systemic racism and how that's held in place by fear. And our fear is so great, we can't even look at a lot of what's going on and all of these kinds of things. The climate, our inability to feel connected enough to this earth that sustains us in a visceral kind of way that we want to act on behalf of that. So, right now they're trying to take all the climate pieces out of the infrastructure bill. And it's like, who cares about infrastructure if we don't have a planet? Anyway, you can hear that I get very wired up about some of these.
And I do too. And I'm sure our listeners are right along with us. And I guess I would ask, how do you personally continue to hold hope, knowing that we have so many systems that are against our neurobiology and our safety?
Well, that's why I can hold hope, Sarah, though. It's exactly what you said. Our core neurobiology as human beings has developed so that we have the capacity to be empathic and be in good connection with each other. And that capacity is still in us, no matter how wrecked it has gotten by our own history, by the culture around us, by the systems in place and all of that. So I continue to hold hope because it's still here. The capacity is still here. We look at little kids, by the time they are 3 years old, if they have had good nurturance, they have the capacity to take empathic action on behalf of another. There was
Mm.
beautiful research where the man's last name was Felix, I think. Anyways, quite a long time ago. But he would bring these little kids in and he would have a stack of books and he would drop a book on the floor. And if he laughed about it, when the noise came, the little one would look up, look at his face, sensing what's going on. And if he's kind of smiling and laughing about it, they'd go back to playing. But if he looked upset in any way, these little 2.5 to 3.5-year-old kids would come over, they'd pat his leg, they'd pick up the book and hand it to him. Their brains were already mature enough not only to feel empathy, but to take empathic action on behalf of another. That's who we are. But it's not happening nearly enough at this point. But it doesn't mean the capacity is gone. I mean, one of the things we talk about a lot in our groups is inherent health. But side by side with implicit memory and trauma, we also have this inherent health that's in everybody who comes into our office. We have all this circuitry that's just yearning to orient toward that health. And if we can support that, our people recover. I mean, that's how they recover. They don't recover because we put something into them. They recover because what's already in them has the chance to flower and blossom.
Mm.
So I think that's still true here. It seems like often it takes a catastrophe to activate that broadly. And I really don't want it to go that way, but it may be that it does.
And there's a catastrophe. I mean, I find myself going outside now that all of the mask mandates are being lifted. And I'm like, wait a minute, there was a trauma that happened and we're not talking about it. We're just going back to normal, like everything's okay. And I don't know about anybody else, but I'm not okay yet.
No, and I think people can again get into the left hemisphere and ignore it if they're used to being there and they just want to go out and, have a good time but aren't feeling their feelings. But almost everybody I talk to is like, I don't know about this. Like one person said to me, I'm fully vaccinated and my mind knows I'm safe. My body doesn't know anything about safety right now.
Yes.
And as we're getting ready to start teaching in person again in July, I'm lucky I live in Washington and we've done well with the pandemic. Our governor's been really steady and helpful through the whole thing, and I'm really grateful for that. But we have had to make the decision based on the feelings in the group and the feelings of the 2 unvaccinated people that were going to come, that they can't come because there's not enough safety inside of any of us, including them, for us to be able to be together. And it's so sad. I mean, it's really, really sad, but we do have to grieve and we have to be, again, humble and honest about how this has actually affected us.
Right. And again, that humility is not necessarily easy for everyone to access. And so that's wonderful that those participants recognize that they needed to bow out. Wow.
Yeah, and it is. It's wonderful and it's important and all of that. And that we can, again, hold the grief and the sadness of it because everybody wanted them to be able to be there.
Of course. But
their own sense of their own immune systems and what their immune systems could, have. For them, vaccination was not the thing they wanted to do. And I need to respect that too.
Mm-hmm.
There's a part of me also that says to everybody, just get the vaccine. But that's my viewpoint. That isn't theirs. One of the things that happens in the left hemisphere is that all individuality disappears. Everything becomes all algorithm and systems and all of that. So in the left shifted culture, we could say, that vaccination should happen for everybody that, unless they're immune compromised or something, but it should happen. But the right hemisphere wants to listen and be curious and say, what does this mean to you? What is this going to cost you? Is this a cost you're willing to pay? And does that feel right in your own heart? And I think we have to be that way with each other around everything. Can I listen to you? Can I be curious about why you're having this experience and making this choice? And can you, in turn, be curious with me about my choice? So we do that, and then there's some grief sometimes that comes with it. We want to think like, well, then everything will be fine. No, it's like things may be really sad.
Right.
But can we be with that?
Right. I'd love to hear, I know you told us a couple specific stories, but if you have any stories of hope and resilience and transformation in clients or even practitioners that you've worked with, we'd love to hear that.
Oh, gosh.
Right. How much time do you have?
Who leads to mind immediately? Well, I actually have 2 people that just kind of like we internalize our clients. And so I'm just like, who wants me to talk about them? So I can talk a little bit about someone who has been with me for 20 years now. And it wasn't until about 4 or 5 years into therapy that we actually knew what happened to her. that we actually understood why it was that she struggled so much to feel safe in any kind of setting that involved other people, because the story had never been told in the family. But we were able to trust that whatever was happening, that the severity of the wound, even though the family, as she talked about it, seemed, mom was a little narcissistic, dad was a little critical. I mean, it was not the kind of thing you would think would warrant it, but we continued to trust it and we continued to do our work together. And then 4 or 5 years in, finally, the story of what had happened to her was revealed, and that was that her mother had been almost suicidally depressed throughout the pregnancy and for the first 18 months of her life. And it happened because an old auntie came up and said, I wasn't sure you would survive when you were little. So suddenly at about 18 months, mom had popped out of this terrible depression. And of course, in those first 18 months, we don't have any cognitive memory developing yet. We don't have explicit memory. So there was no story. And so it really helped to know that, but it also has helped for us to know that because of the magnitude of the black hole of complete loss that was created by this mom being absent, no siblings, dad's a farmer, he's out gone all day, she's just with this mother. And so there's a hole inside that is not just 18 months, but is at least, about 3 months after conception, we begin to really get in touch with what's happening with our mothers. So we're talking about at a minimum 24 months really of nothing, that we're not being met, and of this kind of desperate situation inside of mom. So we've had to move so slowly, but she's been tremendously dedicated to the process. I'm very dedicated to her, but I think the reason we were able to move in this way is because I was able to help her trust that whatever pace she was going was the right pace. So lots has changed, and it's still difficult, and we'll continue to be together. It's hard for her to take me in because people are terrifying to her, and I'm a person. But we just could recognize that it made sense. Anyway, I have such a close, warm feeling between us is there, and it is healing, and it will continue to heal. So I think of that. And then I think of somebody at the other end of the spectrum came to my mind who had the experience of being in an earthquake in California, which happened all the time. And suddenly, after maybe this was the 10th earthquake she'd been in, because she lived there her whole life, this earthquake sent her into a panic that was causing her to want to go jump off of a bridge. But she was I felt she really was securely attached in her family. So we sat with it. She came to me and we sat with it for a while, and we just really could trust that somehow there was a story inside her that needed to be told that she wasn't in touch with, but that would be revealed if we could just stay with it. And so after really kind of amazing, after about, maybe 4 or 5 sessions, because again, she's got a really good neurobiological foundation because she comes from this wonderful family. She began to say, I know what was different about this earthquake. We had moved and the transformers exploded near us. Because what happens in an earthquake, if you live near an electrical place, the transformers explode and it's a concussion that feels just like a bomb. I've been in those earthquakes.
Wow.
I know what those are like. And she said, that's what set it off. And she said, I don't know why. So she could feel that concussion in her body, and we began to work with the panic. And she said, I just think I need to talk to my mom. She said, I just feel my mom will know something. So she went to her mom, and the story that had never, ever been shared in the family, as far as what actually happened, was shared. When mom was about 8 months pregnant with this woman, mom was in Hawaii during Pearl Harbor, and her husband was on the ships. So she's running back and forth in a state of panic on this cliff, overlooking as the bombs are dropping and the planes are going overhead, and didn't know for 48 hours whether her husband was alive or dead. So in the midst of this very secure and beautiful family, there had been these moments of utter terror that because of them, they had just wiped it out of their history. It just didn't talk about it ever. But even at 8 months gestation, this child was feeling this intense terror. And so when those transformers exploded, it woke up this memory inside of her, and she was feeling that terror and that panic. So it was like this gradual process of her realizing that it was the transformers, and then her inner wisdom realizing somehow she had to go to mom and talk about this. And then we were able to work with it with a little more knowledge, but we began to just hold that little 8-month-old fetus and go through this trauma, and also comfort the inner mom that she'd internalized. who was terrified until it integrated enough that it could go all the way through and she could experience that her father hadn't been killed. But it was this 8 hours of terror that was buried deep inside of her that would never, ever have woken up had those transformers not exploded. Right.
Wow.
We were together maybe 6 months moving through this, she had such a foundation inside of security. And of course, the other person had a black hole instead of that. So again, really respecting pace and really being able to trust again that the wisdom is inside. And if we can just sit together and keep holding that reality, what needs to come forward will come forward, and it'll come forward at a pace that's manageable for the person. Like she could stand a lot of this coming up because the second person, because she had built this in her family, there had been built this wonderful holding kind of structure inside her own being, and she had internalized all these loving people. So she could go right into it and we could move through it fairly quickly. But the other person had no foundation.
What I feel like is one of the important components of this is you trusting that there was a story and not even needing to know the story. And I could see a therapist who's really more cognitively focused actually causing harm if they're either trying to find the story and, tell me what happened or not trusting that something happened because there is no story.
Right. That would be very easy, the first person I talked about, to pathologize that person.
Yeah.
And label them some kind of disorder or whatever, and assume that because there wasn't a story that made cognitive sense, that there was something, deeply wrong with this person. They were ill, they're disordered. So instead of disorder, it's really helpful to think about adaptation. And then if we can stay in how is this an adaptation? How is it adaptive for this person to be terrified of every other living human being?
Right.
Then I have to know there's a story in there somewhere, and we may never even know it, but we can still be with it because the feelings in the body are telling the truth. The perception that everybody's dangerous is the truth for her. That's her truth. And if we can keep being with that, then things will be guided in some way. And we might never have known. This little old auntie might never have told her that.
Yeah.
But it happened, and I'm so grateful because it did help settle things like, now we get it. In a different way than we did before, but we were still doing the same work. We just had a little more information to help us.
Yeah. Would you share a little bit for listeners about what your training program is like in case anyone's interested in joining you?
Yes, of course. We do several things, but one of them is kind of foundational, is a year-long immersion program where people come for 3 days, 4 times in the year, and then have a listening partner to stay connected with in between times so that there's this sense of continuity. And we really work to embody the principles of interpersonal neurobiology. So that's our goal. We do a lot of sand tray, we do non-dominant hand drawing, we do some collage kinds of things so that as we're talking about these principles, people are working on their own healing and also really sensing what the meaning of these principles and how they're healing. So that's what we do. And we've had to be suspended from doing it because this isn't something you can do online. So we do that. And then I'm going to have an opportunity next year to do a year-long program with a group from Ireland where we will be doing it online for 3 hours once a month. And we will still be doing some collage and all that. So I'm going to be interested to see how that unfolds. But the information for all of that will be on our website, which is nurturingtheheart.org.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your heart and your presence here today. I'm sure that listeners got so much out of it like I did.
Well, I just am so delighted to be here with you, Sarah, and it's lovely to be kindred spirits, isn't it, on this journey toward as much healing as can happen in the world. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thanks so much for joining us for today's episode. To find more about our guest, check the show notes or visit us at www.narmtraining.com/transformingtrauma. Please join us starting in September for our NARM Online Basics training to learn how to transform trauma. This NARM Online Basics training is available for helping professionals working with clients or populations dealing with complex trauma. Now more than ever before, it is essential that we learn how to resolve complex trauma and support post-traumatic growth. If you're looking for more advanced training in understanding the impacts of attachment, relational, developmental, and intergenerational trauma, join us for this Level 1 NARM training to become a NARM-informed professional. For more information and to apply, please visit www.narmtraining.com/onlinebasics. Thanks to Andrea Klunder and the Creative Imposter Studios for producing and editing, to Tori Essex for our album art, and to Brad Kammer for the creation of this podcast. We look forward to building community and connection with you and changing the world by transforming trauma.